When the pandemic forced our world to stop earlier this year, home became everything. It became our gyms, our spas, our offices, our coffee shops. We've never had to rely on our home to give us so much. And while many have long enjoyed the privilege of seeing home as a safe space, that idea has taken on new meaning now that home is, in a way, our only safe space. Because of that, everyone wants to know how to make their home the best it can be. At Well+Good, for example, in April, May, and June, we got 3 times more traffic to our home content than we did during the first few months of the year. Today, our 3 fabulous panelists will explore how home has quickly evolved to become our favorite wellness hotspot and share tips on how to make your space both soothing and functional. Joining us today, we have Anita Yokota, a licensed family and marriage therapist turned interior designer. Her holistic approach incorporates both aesthetic principles and the psychological implications of design to create thoughtful spaces that best serve both the individual and the larger household unit. We also have Shira Gill, an organization expert whose mission is to inspire people to clear physical and mental clutter so they can reduce their environmental footprint, create space for what they truly care about, and live their best lives. And last but not least, Neil Parikh, the Chief Strategy Officer and co-founder of sleep brand Casper. In 2014, Parikh left medical school to launch Casper, and as the son of a sleep doctor, he bridges the gap between the science of sleep and the realities of the sleep industry. As we move through today's talk, please feel free to drop comments in the chat section and questions in the Q&A section. We will leave 15 minutes at the end to go through some audience questions, so please drop in any as they come to mind. Note that anyone who posts harmful comments will be immediately removed from the discussion. And I'd love to give a huge thank you to Smart 50 for sponsoring tonight's talk. Now let's get into it. Anita, so much of your work is focused on the relationship we have with our home and how that relationship impacts how we exist with our homes and how we interact with those we live with. I'd love for you to dissect that a bit and explain the importance of ensuring that relationship with home is a healthy one.
I'd love to share and expand more of that, Kara. So as you mentioned, the home has become our home base for everything, and a different perspective is very helpful. It's not just a place like before. We were so busy, like probably over busy. Our home was just like a stopover for sleep, eat, and then we moved on. Now, I think being at home, spending so many hours, we're realizing that this could be our safe haven, and emotionally as well as physically. So I really love sharing with people, putting on different glasses in a way and looking at your home as if you were a detective or someone new, and really trying to like dig up things that are gems in certain areas, whether it's through design or functionality, changing out furniture in a way that really improves your own self-care and your relationships, whether you live by yourself, so it's a relationship with yourself, or with your family, partner. All of that really comes down to, how to self-care in that sense at home.
I love that. It's really good to reframe in this moment because we're all kind of getting to know our homes all over again. So it's a cool experience. I'd love to hear briefly from all of you how the pandemic has shifted the demand in the work that you do. Shira, let's start with you.
Sure. So I've had a complete pivot during this season, or I guess multiple seasons now that we're in. So my business was almost fully a one-on-one service-based business. I used to help people organize their homes, and I had been doing that for almost 10 years. And had developed a few virtual programs, but was primarily really a service-based industry. And when the pandemic hit and, we realized we're going to be hunkered down at home, it's not going to be safe to go into people's homes for, we don't know how long, that's starting to shift a bit now, but still can be a little murky. And so I went full steam ahead with my virtual offerings. And then I also launched a bunch of new programs. So I created a workspace makeover program, a clutter-free with kids program, and kind of customized what I was teaching for the times. And I've combined that both with business mentoring and doing live workshops. So my business has gone from kind of one-on-one in people's homes to almost primarily on Zoom. And what's interesting is I've really replaced all of my business with this new normal way of doing things, which is the Zoom lifestyle, and have found, that it's totally possible and that I can help many more people at a more reasonable price point, which I love, because it's really been able to scale my business where I can now help people on every continent instead of just in the Bay Area where I live. So that's been a big unexpected bonus.
Amazing. Neil, I'd love to hear how things have been going at Casper.
First of all, thanks for having me. It's an honor to be a part of this group, and appreciate everybody taking the time to be here. It's been a crazy few months. And it's, I think let's see, we went public in February, and since then, right basically before COVID happened, and it's been wild. I mean, I think at the beginning, things were very difficult when people were unsure what was going to happen. If you live in the city, you're thinking, should I stay here? Should I leave? Where should we be going? And then I think we've seen in generally in the home space, it's been, Wayfair has done really well. A lot of companies in our space have done really well because people are spending a lot more time at home, and we're thinking about, how do I make this my sanctuary, right? If you can't go outside, if you have to quarantine, how do I work, play, live, eat, sleep, have sex, do all the other things that happen at home, but do it better? And so I think things have been going pretty well for us. We have seen a tremendous interest in people wanting to sleep more. The early research that we've been seeing actually has shown that people in America are actually sleeping more now during COVID than they were before, partially because I guess they're spending a lot of time at home. They're thinking about, what else do I need to make it more comfortable? And I think we're also, and I'm sure Anita and Shira, you guys know more about this, but we're multi-purposing a lot of our rooms. And so if I live in a 1-bedroom apartment or a studio apartment, well, now my bed is my office, and it's where I work, and it's where I play, and it's where it's everything happens in. So we have to really think about investing in the things that are in our lives, but from a totally different perspective.
Absolutely. And Anita, how are things going for you?
It's been absolutely explosive as far as construction. March, I thought all my client renovations would come to a halt. And what was interesting was that a lot of homeowners were like, no, we're actually home to project management and we'll keep it safe, but my contractors have been nonstop. The contracting work has been actually booming. My tile guy, he's been in business for 18 years and he had the biggest sales March, April, and June. So everyone's renovating. My busiest person on my team is the landscape architect, because here in Southern California, we have a luxury for the sun, and everyone's putting a spa in their backyard or a pool. So it's been kind of boggling to see everybody willing to really not only put in energy, but financially really invest in their homes as well. Whereas before, maybe they thought, we'll do it later. So it's been kind of crazy to see all that, but it's good. I'm glad people are investing in their home in a way that's very useful and good for their mental health.
Nice. It's so cool to hear how all of you have pivoted and made things work, especially with the stress of living during a pandemic. So amazing. In this moment, we need conducive work environments, at-home gyms, spas, areas to relax, the list goes on. trying to squeeze all that into one spot can be so chaotic. So Shira, I'd love for you to explain how to be intentional when carving out these spaces and allowing your home to shift with your needs.
Yeah, so we're having to get real scrappy and flexible and creative right now. I personally live in a 1,200 square foot bungalow. I'm in Northern California, and I live with my husband, my 2 kids who are in middle school and 5th grade, and a puppy. And so, you know, as Anita was saying, we used to all kind of be out of the house doing our thing, and we would just come home to eat dinner and go to bed. And now we're running like the homeschool for 2 kids at 2 different schools. I'm doing my work and sometimes podcasts and recording. My husband is on conference calls all day. The puppy's barking. And so we've had to kind of like take a step back and look at our walls and say, how are we going to make this work? Like, how are we going to use the space that we've got and get creative and carve out individual areas for each person in our home? I should mention, you know, my kids, I have 2 girls, and they had rallied for their own rooms right before the pandemic. So I lost my office and my workout room like moments before. Not great timing, but so what we've realized is, okay, our house used to be a space that was set up for entertaining, for having play dates, for doing all of these activities that right now in this moment in time, we're not doing. Right now, what we're doing is work and school and doing our best to occasionally work out from our living room. And so what we've done is we've like cleared out space from our dining room that was, you know, cluttered up with dining room platters and excess glassware that we realized this is not the moment in time for any of that. So we're going to clear that out and make a work from home station, a school from home station. And I'm really into creating boundaries between work life and home life, which is even more challenging right now. So I've given everyone like a little box, like almost like a bin where, you know, before we sit down for dinner, it's pack up all the electronics and the paper piles and the homework, and let's clear it out and have a clean slate for dinner and kind of transition our day. And, you know, we've also made sacrifices to make things work. So my husband really felt like his mental health was suffering without being able to work out. He was like a religious worker outer, and, you know, his gym closed and he was just like paralyzed. And so we now have a really ugly elliptical machine in our living room. And it's one of the things I'm just saying, all right, we're going to roll with this. Like right now, we need our home to be a gym. And, you know, I got a yoga mat and put it in a discreet place in our bedroom so I can do yoga, he can work out. And we're also getting flexible with our outside spaces, which is a little tricky in this moment because we're in fire season. But prior to that, we were really dividing up our like little outdoor patio and back deck and saying, this is your classroom, this is your workstation. So it's all about just looking at things with fresh eyes and seeing how can you add or subtract to meet the current needs.
I love that. Now we're really testing how flexible our home can be. So that's a really interesting experience. Thinking to how before everything happened, home probably wasn't the go-to spot for things like exercising, but one wellness activity that we've always done at home is sleep. Neil, can you speak to the amplification of sleep as a wellness practice and how the bedroom has really become a key wellness spot?
Yeah. I mean, I think we've always thought about our bedrooms as, like we said before, a sanctuary. But I think when people are starting to think about things differently, and like Shira was talking about, carve out that space. So I used to have a TV in my room, for example, and I religiously grew up watching TV before I go to sleep. Now that's like one of the worst things you can possibly do. So we took the TV out of the bedroom. And so I think that, you know, people are having to think about, do you really want to multi-purpose things? Can you do shifts in actually how the room works? Or do you actually want to single purpose things and have certain things that are specifically just for that purpose? In the bedroom specifically, partly because when you think about we look at something called the sleep arc. So when you think about going to sleep, it's not just actually the time period in which you're asleep, but there's a period of falling asleep, the drifting, I'm getting more tired, I'm whether you're lighting a candle or there's this whole like bedtime ritual that a lot of people have that really helps them ease into that period. And there's a period of actually being asleep, and then there's a period of time in which you wake up in the morning, right? And that kind of like drifting to be awake. And your bedroom has so many ways of actually triggering different emotions. So, and it's little things. So even, for example, when it comes to the bathroom, a lot of people will drift to sleep and then realize, well, I want to now brush my teeth before I go to sleep. Well, if you turn on the bright lights, once you've like toned down and then you go into your bathroom, turn on the bright lights, you're actually waking yourself back up. And then you're probably going to have a mint toothpaste, which is going to get you even more energized. And so it's reversing the cycle of drifting asleep. And so I think a lot of people now are starting to think about, how do I create a space, a vibe, and then a ritual and a routine so that you can think about how are you continuously downshifting over a certain amount of time to help you ease into sleep.
Nice. And a reminder for anyone who's just joined, we will be leaving time at the end for a Q&A. So if you haven't already, feel free to drop in any of your questions about home, organization, sleep, anything that these experts can answer. It's right in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. Thinking back to March, April, May, everyone was baking banana bread, doing puzzles, activities similar to interior design in that you can use them to exert a feeling of control. Anita, how can we lean into that feeling of control that comes from design to help us feel safe at home instead of stuck at home?
That's such a great question, because I think even personally for myself, quarantining and just the whole pandemic really triggered my anxiety level as far as not knowing. The lack of certainty really kind of increases our uncomfortableness and anxiety levels. So using our home as a place to center us, and through interior design, which is something so exciting that we can actually do now, is very helpful. It's very grounding. So even things like having a rug under your bed, even if you have carpet, but adding that layer of a pretty rug visually invites you into the space. Under your feet, having that just tactile sense grounds you. So there's so many different ways to help you feel secure, but it will take some intentionality and effort. And first and foremost, it really starts with your mindset. So instead of feeling like we're kind of trapped in our homes, turning it around, flipping the script and saying, now that we have so much time, how do I make this space a place where I can improve my relationship with myself, with my partner, with my family? And, again, there's just a variety of different interior design tips and tricks that you can lean into that. So mindset, and then different ways of using design to secure yourself at home are a great place to start.
Nice. And Shira, when you're spending so much time at home, the ways in which your home just really wasn't working for you become even more obvious. What would you say has been the toughest space for people to organize, and what are some of your tips for doing it effectively?
Yeah, so there's a few. I would say the kitchen is definitely the most kind of intricate and involved space that tends to paralyze people. Because when you think about the kitchen, there's so many different zones, and I think people can go in and just feel like, where do I even start here? There's the prep and the cleaning and the food storage and the fridge and the pantry. So I like to break any project down into little mini bite-sized chunks. It's kind of my best productivity hack. Is most people get overwhelmed and don't take action because things just feel too big. And so they get paralyzed and they don't do anything. And so I've come up with this little hack called the 15-minute win. And you basically pick one mini project, focus all of your attention on it for 15 minutes, set a timer, and see what you can do. So in the kitchen, I challenge people to do things like just clear your kitchen counters. That's it. Like just relocate the miscellany that has landed on the counters that doesn't belong there. That can be a win. Clean out your fridge. Take 15 minutes and take all of the things that are expired or you're not going to eat, compost, recycle, give the surfaces a wipe down, and you'll feel like you're winning at life in 15 minutes. And then if you really want to do like a full scale edit, organization, elevate project, likewise, you just want to break it down into tiny little nuggets. So in the kitchen, I kind of break into zones. So I think, okay, what are all of the things you use for prep? Let's get all of your gadgets and utensils, plop them on the counter, do a big edit, wipe your drawers down and put them back. And that's something you really can integrate into your day. Even if it's like 15, 20 minutes, one drawer at a time will lead up to massive transformation. So that's like my big overarching advice for any home organizing project is break it down into a surface, a drawer, a shelf. Don't take too much on at once and then kind of unearth your entire room, but just take off one little bite and conquer it.
Got it. And right now, I'm sure everyone is seeing this all over their Instagram feeds or in their own homes. Everyone is so into their plants. Anita, can you speak to the benefits of having plants in your space, both aesthetically and also for your mental health?
Absolutely. As you can see, I even love the color green on my walls because green really, really refreshes our visual senses, and through our retina, it sends to our brain messages of renewal and refreshing, just positive, vibes. So having real plants is especially helpful because it actually breathes fresh air into the space. But I also encourage people, like this little plant in the nightstand, I don't know if people can see it, that's actually a faux plant. So whether maybe it's because you've killed too many plants before and you just don't want to try anymore, but I always tell people to try more. Or, my partner, Travis, he doesn't want a live plant next to him, but I put it there just for the benefits of just the visual sense and the way it triggers our brain chemistry for that refreshing feeling. It is so beneficial. And it's a great way to decorate because this is something I tell clients all the time. If you have a really weird corner, put a stool and a plant and it just like makes the space, or a table and it looks empty, put a plant on it. So it's a wonderful way to design your home. It adds so much life and fresh air. So aesthetically, you can hang it on like planters from the window. Those are really pretty. So vertical space, horizontal space, plants are just such a versatile way to decorate, but also breathe life into our space so that we feel renewed.
And a follow-up to that, you mentioned beyond plants, just the impact that the color green can have.
Yes.
Your mood and your vibe. What are some other colors that have been found to be super soothing in the home?
So, something very obvious is white. You've probably seen a trend a lot in the last few years is a lot of people are painting their rooms white again because it's a symbol of purity and it's clean, it's fresh, it's a clean slate. So white is a wonderful color for your bedroom as well, or someplace like in your work from home space. It really just can clear your mind. It doesn't trigger a lot of busy activities. So something like red or orange, it's a wonderful color because it's exciting. But what they've shown in research is that when red and orange is constantly around, or yellow, so yellow is super bright. A lot of people like to add it to maybe their kitchen or other fun places, but when there's too much, it's kind of a saturation point where then it overexcites our brain activity. So pops of yellow and orange, it's exciting, it's wonderful, but if you want go-to soothing colors, it would be blues, greens, whites, a soft gray. Those are more long-standing for relaxing tones.
Cool. Thank you for making me feel very on trend in my white walls.
You are definitely on trend.
And when it comes to investing in our homes, so much has changed. I think back to my granny's house when I visited her when I was little. Her couch was covered in plastic. And sometimes you'd go to a friend's house and they just had that one room that nobody was allowed into. You just kind of looked at it from the hallway. And now we're seeing with brands like Casper that people are really investing in their comfort and their well-being when it comes to home. Neil, can you speak to this a bit? And what room do you think is going to get the wellness makeover next that we've seen in the bedroom?
Well, let's start with talking about the bedroom for a second. I mean, you're totally right. I think the nature of the room has dramatically changed, and I think in some ways for the better. So traditionally, when you go to somebody's house, bedrooms are kind of like this weird place. Like you don't go in other people's rooms, really, right? It's like their intimate space. Like usually the doors are closed. You spend time in the common spaces. But I think what's happening right now is that I've had some of the most fun just like sitting in somebody's bedroom. It kind of brings you back to college. There's a certain level of intimacy when you're just sitting on somebody's bed having a conversation, or like, you know, if you're having people over. And so I think that there is, it's kind of a psychological thing, but almost like being a little bit more open to sharing some of that space with people. And I noticed this even on work Zoom calls, for example. If somebody has no other room and they're doing a Zoom call from their bed, well, now you like see what their bedroom is like. Well, I've never seen what anybody else's bedroom is like before unless I've gone to their house. And so that actually, like, I think subliminally actually opens up some vulnerability and openness with other people where you can suddenly see inside of their homes in a meaningful way. Which I think is pretty cool. I think that actually, like, in a time where we're so separated, helps to bring us a little bit closer together. Where like, now I know a little bit about each of you guys and your style and your taste, aside from just your clothing, because we can now put it on for the world to see, or at least all the people on today. But yeah, I think other places, I mean, I think the kitchen is obvious. There are a lot of, with the craze that's happened with baking, we've seen, I invested in all of these, you know, accoutrements and Dutch ovens and things for like baking collateral, which now I'm going to need Shira's help figuring out where to put all of this stuff. I think the bathroom is another really interesting place, partly because oftentimes it's either connected to a bedroom or it can be part of that routine in terms of thinking about, it's like usually where you start and oftentimes where you end your day. And so it actually is connected in some ways to the bedroom, but it can also be that sanctuary space, right? If you have a lot of people living in your home and it's a relatively small space, sometimes it's the only place where you can go by yourself, shut the door, and just be like, I need some alone time, right? Whether it's from the movies or you're just going inside and saying like, I need my space. And so I think people are starting to invest a lot more into their bathrooms, whether it's just making it look nicer, putting in candles. I actually have a plant, Anita, in my bathroom. It's a fake plant though, because obviously it would get no light. But yeah, you know, and thinking about, like, I'd never before COVID thought about putting a plant in a bathroom, but I was like, oh yeah, I go into this thing all the time. We should have plants in there. So yeah, things are definitely changing.
Cool. And Shira, when we spoke last week, you talked a bit about how you did a makeover in your backyard and how it was a space that you never really paid much attention to because the buildings around it weren't great. And you're just like, it's never going to get any better. But now you've really taken the time to make it the best that it can be. And I'd love for you to speak about that a bit. And also, there's just such an idea of, in my next apartment, in my next house, I'll do this, I'll get that, I'll have a better view. But right now, and though so many people are moving, we're kind of having to appreciate and work with what we have now. So I'd love for you to talk to that a bit.
Totally, yeah. So when we bought our house, our biggest lament was there was no backyard. We had kind of a little patio in front and a little sad, neglected deck with some weeds in the back. And we're really surrounded by all sides. Like, we've got medical buildings, dental buildings, a grocery store. We're in a super urban area and you can see everything. So I think early on, we just kind of gave up on our outdoor spaces, like, you know, I'll focus on what's inside, and then that's just not going to go anywhere. And then I think, you know, after several months sheltering in place and having all of us packed in like sardines, we started really thinking, what can we do? I mean, my kids were literally having picnics in the car because they were so restless. And so we looked outside and we said, you know what, maybe there is potential here. Let's see what we can do. And it was not a big budget project. There were no contractors involved, but we literally put out, I'm looking outside right now, we put a table and chairs, some big umbrellas, some potted plants. I do not have a green thumb, so we got olive trees and succulents that I was told it would be hard for me to kill. And we put a hammock in the back and another table and chairs in the back. And so now when our kids are looking for a place to go or we need them to get some air, instead of having this kind of sad slab of cement, there's like a whole other living room. So I feel like we've created 2 additional living rooms outside of our house, just by getting kind of flexible and scrappy and saying like, well, what if we put some plants and an umbrella and maybe a sunshade for a little privacy? So all of this was stuff we just ordered online and kind of cobbled together. And we worked with Yard Zen, who helped us come up with a little bit of a vision. And I can honestly say, like, it feels like we've doubled our home just by doing these outdoor spaces. And so I think sometimes it does take, you know, fresh eyes or just looking around and saying, what are we needing? What can we create? You know, we never would have guessed. We've owned this house for 7 years and we now love our outdoor spaces and we eat outside every night. The kids do homework on the patio. So it feels like we've really reclaimed these neglected spaces.
And before we get into our Q&A, so if you haven't already, drop your questions in the Q&A section. But before we get into it, I'd love to hear from each of you what one thing is that you'd recommend people do to make their homes supportive of good well-being. Anita, we can start with you.
The one thing that I would really encourage everyone, it doesn't matter if your space is teeny tiny or large, is just being really intentional about finding your personal zone. So even if you're living by yourself, it's very helpful to have an intentional space where it's your go-to relax spot, you know, because everywhere now is our work from home roam zone. Like I call it a roaming zone because I know I get kind of bored and it's just sitting at one area, or my kids kick me out because they need the, you know, desktop. So I've made, believe it or not, a part of my smaller master bathroom, my little personal me time zone. So I would encourage all of you to just find an intentional spot where if you're stressed out or you're feeling a little anxious, more anxious that day, you didn't sleep well, that is your personal me zone. And that's your go-to place to meditate, to deep breathe, and really, you know that's your go-to place so that you won't feel lost at home. That's like your security home base within your home base.
Cool. And Neil, what's your number one tip?
I think for me, it's really about I like creating token moments in the home where you see something and it either reminds you or you do something and it ends up being ritualized. So for me, it's usually like burning incense sticks, which is like probably not good for the world. But you know, I always think to myself, like, we know that the olfactory system has a very powerful connection to memories, to relaxation, to calm. And so I set a routine where I do that, come in, go into my kitchen, set it, read a book, and like it just ends up creating a very like multi-sensory experience, such that like even if I'm actually super stressed out and I haven't meditated or done all the things like you're supposed to do, but nobody has time to actually do, like you can almost trick yourself into it through one of the other senses that might be really powerful, whether it's listening to music or smelling something. So it's a fast recharge.
I love that. And Shira, how about you?
Yeah, so I'm a minimalist, and my big philosophy is like the best thing you can do is eliminate things, subtract things, and it's free, it's accessible. So my one big thing, one action item would just be clear a surface. pick any surface that you see on the regular. Could be your nightstand, it could be your dining room table, it could be your kitchen counter. Every single thing that you see, you have to mentally process, and it draws attention away. So I think just having a clean slate during this time when we're stuck inside feels really good. So I would say, you know, get your donation bin ready and put a few things in it every day, and you will start to feel a little lighter, a little freer.
Amazing. And now we can get into some audience questions. This first one comes from Catherine, and her question is for Neil, but anyone else can chime in if they have thoughts. She says, while I understand pre-bedroom morning rituals vary from person to person, what are some tips for winding down at night or even waking up in the morning? I know some of the obvious tips and tricks, but do any of you have any surprising ideas that have worked for you in this season of life?
Maybe I'll start with a few, and then I'm sure Anita and Shira have some good ones around room and space. I love hacking things, and so I think about like, what are things that you can do such that you don't actually have to do anything, so that you don't have to exert extra effort. Because I feel like with sleep, it's one of those things where if you already have to eat healthy and you have to exercise, it's exhausting to just think about how am I going to get good sleep. And so I feel like there are certain things that you can do that just will make your life much easier. First and foremost, I think about temperature. So if your room, I mean, it depends. There are certain people who don't like sleeping cold, but the research shows that, you know, if you're at 62, 64, 65 in that range, you're going to sleep a lot better. Part of that has to do with the biology of your body. Part of it has to do with one of the things that we've seen through research is that in the middle of the night, if you find yourself continuously kicking your feet out from underneath the duvet or the sheets, it's usually because there's actually a tremendous amount of humidity building up. So we put cameras where we were looking at people, and then we noticed that, okay, every time they kick out their feet, it's because there's a ton of humidity and hot air building up underneath the sheets. And so lowering the temperature is one way in which you can essentially compensate for that. The other things you can do are just buy breathable sheets. You can, you know, I think it's why some people love sleeping in linen, although it's like, you know, arguably maybe not the best thing in the winter. But so like set up your surroundings in a great way, right? If you lower the temperature, or you find some way of actually cooling your microclimate, you're just going to be a lot more comfortable. So you don't have to actually like do as much. The little one that I think is a trick that I never really thought about is hydration. And so you're going 8 hours, you know, let's call it 6 to 8 hours when you're sleeping and you're not consuming any water. But the rest of the day, you would never go 6 hours without having something to drink, usually if you're having coffee, water, or something. And so your body's getting very dehydrated. Now, the problem on the other side is that if you drink a big glass of water before you go to sleep, a lot of people are going to have to get up and go to the restroom. And so you've got to figure out with yourself, like how much can you actually have that's not going to bother you. But aside from just water, you can actually put in, I'll either put in some lemon or something that will actually help in terms of electrolytes, or you can get their powders that you can get at Costco or online, like Hydrant or Cure, that will actually help increase the absorption of electrolytes, which will actually help you sleep better. Yeah, I think those are the top ones. Sorry, I talked a lot.
No worries at all. Anita, Caitlin would love to know if you have any suggestions of intro to design books to read and understand how we can use design to feel more grounded in our home.
Definitely. There's quite a few good ones. I'm kind of an eclectic girl. So like Emily Henderson's book Styled is one of my favorite go-tos. Also Domino magazine has great like essentials, like foundational design tips that has all kinds of really great graphics, like how-tos. So those are like kind of like the classic interior design books you can start perusing. But you know, like I love interior design blogs too. So not just books, you can also go on different blogs and yeah, so there's so many. It's like you can search for one and then you'll go down the rabbit hole. Pinterest is another wonderful, inspirational kind of place to look at interior design books, but also images that you can do your own design boards. So books are definitely awesome. And I'm trying to think if there's any there another go-to one that I really love? I love Rebecca Atwood. She's not necessarily all interior design. She hand draws her patterns and onto textiles, and it's very soothing and calming. I just love flipping through it for inspiration. So that would be a third one I would suggest for her.
Amazing. And Andrea is wondering from anyone, some tips for if you're living alone right now, things that you can do to your space.
Even though I have a family and, you know, lots of people around me, I'm very mindful of sharing ideas for people who live by themselves, because that, you know, that's also a big reality. It's not just about us who have a lot of people and we're trying to find personal boundaries. But so as far as tips, it's very similar to what I had mentioned earlier, is even though we live by ourselves, there's still like zones, as what Shira was mentioning, that we can really create. So even if we're in a studio, it's really good for our mental health to have that kind of internal structure, so that we have a go-to place for certain tasks. And even if it's a multifunctional room, to have it organized gives us a sense of security, and it decreases our anxiety, because when everything's kind of mishmash everywhere, it just automatically feels more anxiety producing. So really making an intentional ways to structure your tasks and your daily routine, even if you're living in a studio.
And Shira, we have a question from Abby wondering, saying that seeing clutter in her home makes her so anxious, but it accumulates so quickly. Do you have any tips for quelling clutter before it builds up?
Yeah, so number one tip, you may not like it, but is go on a spending freeze, a shopping freeze. So whenever I'm working with clients, like I think about it like, if we're trying to organize what you've got that already feels overwhelming, and then more items keep coming in, it really becomes like a Sisyphusian task where you're pushing the rock up the mountain and it just feels impossible. So if you feel overwhelmed by clutter, it probably means you have too much volume. So super simple math, like don't keep adding volume, but work on eliminating the volume that you have. And I do that really systematically, one room at a time, so that you don't get overwhelmed. So it's taking one room and saying, what do I want the purpose of this room to be? What do I want to do in this room? What does it need to facilitate? And anything that doesn't serve that purpose has got to either be relocated elsewhere in your home, or you can donate it or consign it. So I'm really like focused on creating a home that supports your values. And often I'm asking people, you know, does this item actually add value to your life, as opposed to just, could it be useful? I think people get really hung up on the idea that like, well, what if these, you know, 5 espresso makers that I have could be really useful if I have an espresso party? And like, that may be true, but I think it's, if you want a streamlined, curated, organized kitchen, are those 5 espresso makers really, you know, solving the problem? So thinking first, always coming back to your values and your goals with your space and how you want it to feel. And then thinking, what can move to a different room, or what can I get rid of altogether? And just hitting the pause on shopping and consuming. I usually recommend for a month, and then evaluate then and see where you're at and how your space is feeling.
And Neil, with everything changing in the home decor space during this moment, Lauren is wondering if any new trends coming out of the pandemic have changed your product planning or product launch strategy for the next year.
We've definitely been keeping a close eye on it. People are spending a lot more time at home, and so we haven't necessarily changed what's on the roadmap for next year. We are thinking about, though, how to tell different kinds of stories and how to use products for different purposes. And so I think a little bit of it is around inspiration. Okay, like to your point, can I use a pillow for different things, right? I use a pillow as a lap desk so that I don't have to buy a lap desk or like different, it's like, I used to be one of those people that would buy every single gadget for every purpose. And then I was like, I don't need 16,000 gadgets, one for the one use case of the one time that you're going to do something. But yeah, I think it's something that we're keeping an eye on. I think the home space is going to become more important than ever. We're spending a lot more time there. I'm personally thinking a lot about, as we evolve the bedroom, how are people going to live, work, play, multi-purpose it. And I like that idea you had around like changing the scenery or changing the mood or the vibe of the space and kind of doing a formal reset. That's a really interesting idea around what does that look like? Because I think we're going to end up having to create these like mental rituals that, create if it's a play, we're changing the scene, behind the scenes so that we can actually make that mental transition the right way. Otherwise it's going to be really hard. We're going to be stuck long beyond, from one to the other. So long way of saying, yes, we're looking at it.
And speaking of gadgets, Ali asked, how do you start integrating smart devices into your space if you're starting from zero? If anyone has thoughts on that.
I'd ask, like, why do you really want the smart gadgets in the first place? I think I love smart gadgets, and I've been on a quest to try to actually reduce them. I think they have purposes. If you have an Amazon Echo, Alexa, the Google Home, they can be useful if you want to collect basic information. Although now most of the stuff you can get if you have Siri or you have Bixby on your phone. And so there are some interesting places. There are smart home plugs that you can buy either from Amazon or from other places that pretty quickly will, turn the lights and make them smart if you're really into that. But in the bedroom, I always tell people, like, try to get rid of as many devices as possible. Like, the one little blinking light in your room is going to cause so much agony when you look at it continuously. And if you're trying to create as dark of a room as possible, like I actually got tape and covered up, any of the lights that were in my room to try to eliminate it. I think there's also, this is much more emerging research, but really thinking about, do you really want EMF devices that are putting out electromagnetic waves in your room while you're sleeping? So, I mean, you could go all the way from, do I want to turn off the Wi-Fi at night, which is kind of crazy, but if you have kids, maybe is also a good idea, all the way through to just generally trying to keep devices away from your body. And I've noticed that people that have done it seem to feel better, whether that's hey, I'm not looking at my phone before I'm going to sleep because I'm keeping it outside and there's an emotional, spiritual connection to that, or because there's something deeper happening with the science, we'll see. But it seems like there's usually only benefits to it.
Cool. That's a good food for thought. Lauren also wants to know if you all have any suggestions for places to find affordable furniture and make big changes. She says, currently living with parents temporarily and unable to change the pink floral Victorian wallpaper.
So I would say like one of my big go-tos is going used. I think, most people feel like they have to go out and buy new furniture, but there's such an amazing sharing economy happening. And, in my work, I see people all the time who have brand new, gorgeous things, but maybe they're moving across the globe and they can't take it and they just want it out. And even like I have put things for clients on Craigslist free that are worth thousands and thousands of dollars that someone is so stoked to get. So I would say always like check your local Craigslist, Nextdoor, all of those kind of local networks to see what in your own neighborhood is available and potentially at a super low price. And this is the way I think you can get really high quality because you can get things that are like super well made, antiques, things made out of real wood instead of particle board. So I'm always encouraging people to really invest in the fewer better things, but also to look first at what can I get that's used or recycled, or somebody that I know maybe has in their basement or storage area, and I can rescue it for them, and it's a win-win for everybody.
And I wanted to add, as far as that floral pink wallpaper, Amazon is a wonderful place to get temporary wallpaper that's very, very affordable. So temporary wallpaper, literally, it's like a sticker. I've used it even on this wall, but with clients, with kids' bedrooms, pantries, hallway, closets. If you would just add if you want to add a punch of color when you open the door, bookshelves. So temporary wallpaper is a really great affordable hack to just jazzing any kind of space up.
Nice, nice. Yeah, to second Shira, we have a secondhand West Elm couch that was way cheaper and so amazing to be able to get for that price. Let's see. We have a question from Alexia wondering how the pandemic will alter the role of the home in the long term, if anyone has thoughts on that.
I mean, the first thing I've seen is just that people are investing so much more energy and intentionality in their homes. And I think it was much easier to dismiss the importance of your home before, maybe because you were out of your home so much. But I think looking at it as a space where you get to create exactly what you want, and hopefully a place that really reflects your values and your goals and your personality. I always feel like my home is kind of my canvas, and I get to create whatever I want. And as my goals or values change, I shift my home with that. So my hope, I guess, is that this period empowers people to feel that they can make those changes and feel better and happier in their homes, instead of waiting for the one day when they get their dream home or they make more money, but actually working with what they've got now, today, in the present, and seeing what are the little tweaks that can have a big impact.
And another question for Neil, an attendee is wondering if you have any suggestions for couples with different sleep schedules, where one person's a night owl and the other is a morning person.
This is one of the most common things that we hear about from people is trouble with your partner. So you're not alone. This is something that almost everybody thinks about, because very few people are actually either on the same schedule. So there's a few things. So with ergonomics, one, if you have a mattress, you look for something called motion isolation. So that means that if the other person's getting out of bed, you don't want to feel it. Because if you have a bed that's connected the whole way across, and every time they're going up to the bathroom or they get into bed or they wake up early and that's going to bother you, you're going to wake up. Now, minor wake ups are normal. Like we actually wake up over 100 times, I think, over the course of a night, just, sporadically, but you don't want something that's going to keep you up. So if that's something that bothers you, think about that. We also I tell people you should think about cocooning. So one of the things I do is, because I also fall asleep earlier than my partner oftentimes, but we want to be in the bed at the same time, is I'll put on an eye mask and earplugs, and I do look like a zombie, but I basically am building my own area so that I can be physically next to my wife, but not necessarily, in my own sleep environment. And so I think you just have to own it. I think there's something about being able to recognize that if you get the right amount of sleep and you're in tune with your own body, and it's totally okay that that's going to be different than your partner or somebody that you're sharing it with. And once you accept that and you own it and you kind of just try to lean into it and do what you need to do, you're going to be a better version of yourself, right? And that's going to make the other 16 hours of your day much better, rather than you being tortured and only sleeping 4 or 5 or 6 hours because you can't figure it out with your partner. And so that does require a little bit of habit change, but there might be compromises like what we do, which is that we'll try to go to bed at the same time, even if one person doesn't necessarily want to sleep. But we'll dim the lights so somebody can still read, but I can actually try to fall asleep and try to make it work that way.
Nice. And I actually have one last question for Anita. Now that we're all realizing the importance of having a functional and comfortable home, what interior designs trends do you think we'll see in the coming years?
I think the biggest trends are going to be all related to work from home. You know, whether like what was mentioned before, as far as, you know, laptop accessories or different things, it's really beautifying our work from home spaces so that we feel productive, and having that mental health balance of work from home boundaries, yet, you know, having still being at home. And how do we keep a sanctuary with our laptop and headsets for our calls and Zoom Life and everything? So whether it's just even paint colors, what paint colors to paint our walls for our work from home spaces, to ergonomic chairs, like even the type of rug that you would want in your work from home space so that our chairs can roll on and off it easy. Like there's so many different piles of your rug, you know, and interior design trends that are all, I think, going to lend into making our work from home space a successful area so that we can feel like we've got a good work life and home life balance. So I think that trend is going to keep on going.
Nice, nice. Well, that brings us to the end with 1 minute to spare. Thank you so much, Anita, Neil, Shira, for joining us this evening. I know I learned a lot, so I'm sure everyone at home did as well. And thank you all for joining us for today's talk. And again, thank you to Smart 50 for sponsoring. I hope you all have a great night, and thank you again.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, guys.